Who is this? Is he a friend? You can get him out of here. Get out of here. Get out of here. Go ahead, you can throw him out. Well, now we know that politics is getting serious, so now we know we're getting serious. Now, he's just a disturbed person.
Mike Breen, we're both military vets, sworn oath to uphold the Constitution. We just rolled that clip of President Trump, former President Trump, riling up the crowd as it jeers at a protester at one of his rallies. It appears that one of the members of the crowd actually assaults this protester. What strikes me, and I think what makes it hard for so many people to appreciate the danger that reintroducing violence into our political discourse poses, is that there's such a clownish element. It looks so undisciplined, it looks so circus-like, but it's no less menacing.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it is in a lot of ways fundamentally a circus. He talks about, as the protest is being dragged away, he talks about how, he talks about it like it's an act in a show. People have asked us for more of this kind of thing, and now we're back into the political season, so we're going to get more of this kind of thing, as if having people come to his rallies and protest and then get beaten up and ejected is like part of the show, which I think it very, very much is. And it reminds me of, I'm going to get the quote wrong, but that line in 1984 when they're talking about the appeal of the fascist politics of Big Brother, and it's a foot grinding into a human face forever, that feeling. There's an audience for that, unfortunately, and that they came to see somebody that they don't like be humiliated and roughed up a little bit, and they got what they paid for.
I never actually thought about it that way. The audience isn't surprised that violence breaks out at this rally. They're welcoming it. They are relishing the provocations from the man at the podium. I mean, thinking about it that way, it really is a circus act. And far from being embarrassed by it, I think Trump is fueled by it.
I think that's right. He's selling a product. And that product in this campaign, more than anything else, it was anger in 2016. And now it's vengeance. It's full-blown revenge for himself, for the people he claims to represent. It's about humiliating those who sought to humiliate us and grinding them to the ground, and doing it as a spectacle. That's unfortunately, as we look around the world and look into history, pretty classic right-wing authoritarian move.
Should we take any reassurance from the fact that it is so disorganized? I mean, you refer back to authoritarian movements throughout history. The ones that I immediately think of had much more disciplined and organized shock troops to intimidate their enemies. My mind immediately goes to the brown shirts in 1930s Germany. And I don't think the MAGA zealots have much in common with that movement other than the zeal. They don't have the structure. They don't have the discipline. Is that an opening to push back? Does that make it less of a threat?
It's definitely a good thing. But when I hear you say that, I both agree with you and I keep thinking not yet.
Yeah.
I mean, these movements always look like a total clown show right up to the point where they get their act together. I'm reminded of there's an account in a book called "Everything You Love Will Burn" by a Scandinavian journalist who was following around right-wing extremists like well before Charlottesville. And the book kind of ends with Trump's election. And he tells the story of a bunch of failed Charlottesvilles, a bunch of attempts to try to get these disparate right-wing movements, neo-Nazis with Klan members, with other people with crazy right-wing ideas, and all these groups have memberships in the dozens max. And he's just trying to, a few of these guys are trying to organize them enough to march together, not say anything blatantly inflammatory, and wear polo shirts instead of like hoods and Nazi paraphernalia. And they can't get it done. And at one point, one of the organizers is standing on the back of a pickup truck yelling at three guys who won't take their Klan hoods off. Like, why won't you guys follow orders? We're supposed to be effing fascists, right? Which is funny, except then you look at Charlottesville and they got it together. Those same three guys are wearing polo shirts. They figured it out. And that's part of the danger of these movements, is that they are kind of funny, like pathetic, right up to the point they get their act together. And it's part of the way they get away with what they get away with in the early stages.
They have in President Trump not just a champion, but somebody who has the potential to not just create a permission structure for their ideologies and their acts of violence, but actually a legal excuse for it. I'm thinking about the pardon power. I'm thinking about the constitutional sheriff's movement, the idea that he might deputize in extremis members of the Proud Boys or Oath Keepers or Three Percenters. It's gone beyond the president name-checking the Proud Boys at a presidential debate to people in his inner circle planning for Trump 2.0, talking about how to create a legal architecture to excuse some of what these groups are trying to achieve.
Yeah, it's definitely happening. And I think, it's really scary stuff. And it can be as easy as just things happen and nobody gets prosecuted. And then they happen again and nobody gets prosecuted. Think about how many people were prosecuted for, horrific crimes in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s South, committed by the KKK, right? Horrible things happen in broad daylight. There are hundreds of witnesses and nobody saw a thing. That's really all it takes. And you can go further than that, of course. You can deputize people. You can grant immunity to people. But sometimes all it takes is the power of the government just willing to look the other way.
Hi, everyone. I want to give a big shout out to all those who have signed up to support this show through my Patreon page. We are off to a fantastic start. Thank you for making it possible. And if you haven't subscribed, I hope you'll consider it. In the coming months, I'll be posting early and exclusive content, including a trailer for the Against All Enemies documentary film, which has been racking up awards at film festivals around the world and will soon be released here in the US. Stand by for more details on that. And if you're a subscriber to my Patreon page, be on the lookout for an early preview. Thanks again, everyone. I also think about the chilling effect. Watching that clip we just saw of this lone protester being driven out of this stadium. First of all, it takes a ton of guts to be that guy. I don't think most people realize what it's like to be screamed at by 10,000 people who want to hurt you. But that's a tough thing to do. But I think that feeling of menace carries beyond that stadium. I see that, and it makes me think twice about speaking out. I know for a fact, I talk to other commentators, it makes them think twice about speaking out. And it's not just the Twitter comments or the trolls out there. It's the very real threat of someone going off half-cocked, of being doxxed. This violence that's made its way into our political discourse is actually making it onto the streets and making people who want to speak out afraid.
Yeah, I think that's true. That's the world we're living We're living in a world where members of Congress who don't want to choose a certain colleague for Speaker of the House, have to worry about the safety of their families, death threats called into their homes, wives threatened, journalists are getting doxxed, activists are getting doxxed, people are having SWAT teams called to their house, in an attempt to hurt them under false pretenses. I mean, the environment of fear is not just rhetorical. There's an implied threat of violence. And the more normalized that gets, and the more normalized the actual physical violence that follows sometimes gets, there's a temptation to leave politics. There's a temptation to leave the public square and say it's not worth it. And it's not just the threat of violence either. I think we have to grapple with the threat of controversy. There are a lot of people in American life that have a point of view on things that used to be considered nonpartisan or used to be considered non-political, or baseline things we could all agree on. People that have businesses, people that have livelihoods. And so to be classed as part of a political team when you don't want to be, and demonized as part of that political team, that also is scary for people. The sense that everything's political, so therefore everything is a forbidden topic, I think is also very real.
You have spent years as the leader of Human Rights First studying how this happens in other countries, to other countries. You have this great quote in the upcoming documentary Against All Enemies, "This is how countries end." What is the closest analog you would point to help us understand what's happening in this country? And how do you see this evolving? Is there any chance this is a fever that will break, that will realize was just an example of mass hysteria and will recover from? Or are there countries you look at that just keep you up at night because they went the other way?
Yeah, this is a global phenomenon, no doubt. And I'm not just talking about history. I mean, about half of the people on Earth in 60 plus countries are going to elect leaders this year. Not just us. And in many of these elections, the dynamics are similar. The results will be contested. We may see violence, and there are populist, aspiring demagogues on the ballot with these kind of movements behind them. Sometimes they lose, and you get to play the game again, right? That may happen here. I hope it does. But the underlying movement and the opportunity it has understood exists in this country, and the risk that it poses should some new leader come along to mobilize it, perhaps more intelligently than the one we're dealing with now, that doesn't go away. It takes a long time to repair that. And it can go all kinds of different ways. I mean, I think one of the things that we have going for us in the United States, among many, that some countries don't. You can look at the Hungaries of the world, or the Turkeys of the world, or the Russias of the world, is that we have this deep federalist tradition. We have really strong states. We have really strong city governments. We have really strong state national guards, attorneys general, different legal codes, a tradition of federal jurisprudence, federal courts respecting state authority to some extent. And that makes this country a pretty poor candidate for sort of a classic 1930s style authoritarian centralized state. I think what we're at risk of personally is something a little messier than that, but just as dangerous. A federal government that is weaponized against its perceived enemies, a federal government that is very slow to come to the aid of citizens and parts of the country that it views as hostile, perhaps open conflict between cities and states and federal authorities, even at the level of how to handle street protest or street violence. We saw some of this in the previous Trump administration, but we may see a lot more of it. I worry about dynamics that pull the country apart a little bit more in our case than I worry about dynamics that solidify control under somebody like Trump in a 1984 dictatorial sort of way. Not because I think the philosophy of Trump is different, but because I think the implementation in the United States is uniquely hard. So for those of us who hope that we have tools to stand against the worst case scenario, the answer is we do. We do have those tools, more than many who've faced this before in history have had. But we are going to have to take some risks. And I'm not just talking about famous people. Everybody's going to have to make a decision ultimately about whether they want to be part of the debate, let's call it, about the future of the country, or whether they want to stay home and hope it all works out and try to distract themselves with, whatever escapism is available to them at any given moment. And that's a thing a lot of people in these situations do, Ken. The Russians call it internal migration. Essentially, it's this idea of going someplace else in your mind instead of grappling with the reality of what's happening in your country. We just have to hope our neighbors don't decide to pack their bags and pretend not to live in the world we're really in.
I think that is a really smart take, and something you said earlier, I think captures the stakes. You said sometimes you lose, but you get to play the game again. That's if people respect the outcomes of elections. And I can disagree with someone over really important policy issues, from immigration to healthcare to national defense. And if I lose that argument in a democracy, I can relitigate it the next go around. But if we elect someone who doesn't respect the results of election, who undermines democratic norms, you don't get to play the game again. And I think those are the stakes that need to be driven home in 2024.
Absolutely agree. It's not about policy preferences. It's about keeping the system going.
Yep. Mike, thanks as always. We'll see you again here next week.
See you soon, Ken. Thanks.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.